Yeah, thank you. I'll use mic, actually, it's very handy. Also because I was told many times by my friends and colleagues that since my release I started to speak in lower voice than before, and sometimes it's a bit difficult to hear me. It is a typical prison habit, actually, because you don't want, when you say something to someone, it's not intended for anyone else. It can have consequences. So, microphones are handy, really, in this particular case. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to see you on this sunny, warm morning. Not really, but really nice. Of course, I am a little bit intrigued. I was a little bit intrigued when I've seen the program, because, I'm a main voice in the first panel on how to make a difference in dark times, Ukraine. And then I asked Henry just now, that, should I focus on this or on that? And he said, look, whatever, basically you just say what you want. And I really hope that I'll be just rambling around the things. My honorable commentators will streamline our conversation into something more meaningful. Recently, I had the chance to talk to one nice young Spanish lady who is an excellent driver. I know that because I was using her BlaBlaCar service. In the middle of nowhere, I had to get from point A to point B, and there was no other means of transportation but BlaBlaCar. And she learned that I'm from Ukraine, and she never asked any single question about war or anything, and I was so grateful, because it was during this long, extended advocacy trip, and I was by that time a little bit tired of talking about war and captivity and torture all of the time. I even started to think at some point, will anyone be ever interested to listen to me about anything else? But then, somewhere in the middle of the road, she just asked what city in Ukraine I'm from. Apparently, she followed events in Ukraine very closely. And when I said I'm from Kiev, she said, oh, I'm sorry. I was like, there is nothing to be sorry about. It's the most beautiful city in the world, for me at least. And she said, well, you know, it's hit every night by missiles and drones. And I said, well, yeah, that's part of life in Ukraine at the moment. And we started to talk, and very quickly we switched from wartime topics, like narrowly, to something more general. And she said that she's really worried about the paradox that when people live through the wartime, they recall something that is the most important for them in their lives. And we came to the conclusion that, of course, people living through war, they dream and make plans about what they will do when the war is over, and they will continue to do the most important things for them. But then, when peace comes, within a certain period of time, people tend to forget these things, and they start to focus on something else, something different. She recited certain study, which was conducted some time ago, about youth and like kids in either one or several European countries. What they know about, I think in Spain actually, what they know about their family history, about those who are sitting together with them at the dining table, what their parents and grandparents lived through, what were the happiest moments of their lives, what were the most tragic moments of their lives. And apparently most of kids didn't know, of course. But what they did know, number of followers on social media, here and there, and this influencer and that important TikToker or Instagram blogger. And that was much more important for some reason. So we talked about what is important in wartime and in time of peace. I had some time to think about my fundamentals. I was given it. On the third day in prison in Luhansk, actually, I recalled that sometime before the beginning of full-scale invasion, I thought that many people know me in different capacities, and these capacities somehow sometimes do not correspond. Because to some people I was and still am a human rights defender. So they knew me as a human rights person. Some others knew me as a journalist. Others knew me as someone with rather anarchist worldview. And very narrow circle of my friends knew that I'm quite unconventional, but I'm a Christian. And others knew me as a defender of discriminated groups and communities, including, of course, LGBTQI+. Uh, and of course, to some people, these different capacities, they did not match. But I knew inside of myself that they all are intertwined very closely and they depend one upon another. And I just wanted to have some time and space to trace these links and to come to my fundamentals, maybe consciously, like to do some mental work or intellectual work, and not to be disturbed by the stream of events I was constantly swallowed by. So on the third day in Luhansk prison, I thought, okay, you need the time not to be disturbed and to think, here you are, you can have it. Of course, we were disturbed by interrogations, but these just came and left, and all the other time we were not disturbed because we were not given anything, including pen, paper, text, anything at all. Like toilet paper we didn't have neither. And I started to think, and it lasted for more than 2 years, and actually it lasts up until now. So I would like today to say a few words about 4 points which I found really important, because I started with notions and things we were dealing with at that very moment. First, I started with pain and violence. I realized that I misunderstood violence before. I thought that violence is about, well, breaking people, like destroying them, maiming them, killing them. And there I realized it's not the case. It is a consequence. But the primary notion of violence to me became different. It is about turning other human beings, I'm talking about violence against human beings now. It is about turning other human being into an object. When he or she does what you want them to do, you will tell them to stand up straight, and they will do. To sit down, to do push-ups, to do sit-ups, to sing Russian anthem, to shut up, to run, to duck, whatever, and they will do it. And if they will suddenly, like this toy you turn another person into, if they start to show any signs of their own human agency, this is where destruction comes in. You can break this toy for being suddenly not toyish enough, or just because you are bored with it, or because you enjoy the process of destruction. But this is the next step, and the first step is about dehumanizing the human being, and this is what violence is. Sometimes it is quite enough not to use physical violence, but just create an atmosphere of fear, the one which paralyzes and which turns you into an object. Starting from that, I went to notions of pain and death and freedom and agency, because apparently in this particular case of violence, it became very clear-cut to me to what extent our freedom to choose our own agency, our own actions, is related to us being human. When we don't have this choice, when we don't have this freedom to choose, we're not human anymore. We're just objects. Of course, in very behavioral terms, we have our inner processes still, which do not depend straight away from the orders we receive, but they are not visible and you cannot realize them. So to be human is to be free. And of course, as someone who graduated from Faculty of Philosophy in last millennia, a long time ago, I'm well aware of how difficult the discussion about whether freedom is real for humans is, to me it's not a question anymore. Because to me, freedom is something I can feel. It is very tangible. To understand even very limited freedom, one has to be in conditions where it is absent. And one of a little bit difficult but extremely enjoyable things upon my release were to experience this ability to choose mundane little everyday things. I can wear this or that. I can have coffee or tea. When I came around to coffee shops saying, can I have a coffee? Like, which one would you like? And I was paralyzed. What do you mean, which one? I want coffee. I can go right or left. I can plan my day. I can plan my life. I can make plans for my life. It is very, it is very tangible to an extent. Another thing is that also something I've mentioned yesterday, I also realized that my freedom is not freedom from the others. It is freedom because of the others. I was and I am free because others contributed to my freedom. They enabled me to be free. They gave me tools and knowledge and background and created situations where I can make my own choices. My release from captivity was possible because of the others who defended me, who protested, who made a lot of noise, etc. So I know that I'm free because of them. And I really treasure my others nowadays. And I think this is something quite typical for Ukraine in general nowadays, because in this situation we suddenly, maybe not suddenly, realized how fragile we are, how fragile our loved ones are, physically and also emotionally, and how we should care about them and how we should treasure them. Maybe I'm mistaken, but when I came back to Kiev upon my release, at least it was my impression, I realized that people, most situations, on the streets, those who don't know each other, never met before, they're kind of more careful with one another because they never know what the other person right now goes through, what happens to their loved ones. Maybe right now they received extremely bad news about someone they love. Or maybe they need care. At least they should be treated with care. And this feeling of fragility, it made and still continues to make a lot of impact upon everyday lives. Because everything you treasure can just go up in smoke next minute or next morning. Every single person you know might not live until tomorrow due to night air raid or missile attack, which is completely random. You never know where the next Iskander will fall. And this made a lot of impact upon planning. I've suddenly seen that lives of a lot of my friends and colleagues dramatically changed, not only in terms of wartime specific things, like someone joined military and someone had to relocate, but also that people who postponed important decisions in their lives until tomorrow or maybe later wanted to change something, they wanted to do something with their lives, they wanted to make decisions. But it was not the right time, it's never the right time, as we know. So they will do it later. And suddenly later does not exist anymore. It just doesn't. What you have is just today. If you want to do something important, you just do it today, because it's either today or never. Sometimes it produces interesting impact, because some international colleagues of mine, they've mentioned some sort of wartime hedonism or wartime joie de vivre, when suddenly against the background of mobilization of all the resources and harshness of the worldview, you have here and there sudden, almost spontaneous celebrations of life in very different forms, conventional and unconventional. But it had this air of being, we should enjoy it today because tomorrow might never come. But before we enjoy it, we donate to the armed forces of Ukraine. And after we enjoyed it, we donate to the forces of defense of Ukraine. This is how it's happening mostly. And this is because of this sudden disappearance of later. There is no later, it's just now. And if we want to realize ourselves, if we want to implement something important, we should do it now. There is no self-delusion anymore that we will do it maybe at some point later on. It also gives a lot of strength. This is the third point I wanted to make. Strength of very specific kind. When the full-scale invasion started, I think none of us thought that it will last for that long. I remember when the European Union took an unprecedented decision to grant temporary protection to all Ukrainian nationals for 1 year, with the possible extension for another year if the situation doesn't change. I specialized on migration-related human rights issues, but even me, I thought, they must be kidding me. Do they really think that this will last for 2 years? Okay, now we're in the 4th year, and it's still there. I think none of us, at least none of those whom I know, thought that we will be able to withstand for such a long time. It was mission impossible. And we were not given a chance by most of our international commentators. As you might remember, at the very beginning of full-scale invasion, the forecasts were rather negative. Ukraine would not be able to withstand such an attack of huge and powerful, well-prepared neighbor. And this is where we are. Basically, we've made impossible thing. And we continue to make it. And a lot of people changed their lives in order to contribute to our common defense, survival, and victory, to defense of the most important things, doing things which they never thought they would be able to do in their lifetimes. Completely changing the course of their lives, getting new skills, discovering new abilities. Basically, what we are doing as a community, and I think a lot of people as individuals, we constantly overcome ourselves, becoming stronger, more traumatized, but in a way more powerful, showing that we as humans are not just beings, not of course just, intellectual animals, and not just even beings with certain constant features. We are projects, each and single one of us. We are projects which realize ourselves constantly. And this is what we are doing right now. By overcoming ourselves, getting higher, getting better in terms of this particular situation. But of course, due to fragility, getting more traumatized and more deformed at the same time. And being a project can be based on hope and is also a source of hope. We live on hope now. Hope is not knowledge. Sometimes it goes against all knowledge we have. Hope is not faith. They're intertwined, but they are still different things. Hope is projecting ourselves into a future, trying to reach beyond the horizon. This is linked to this overcoming ourselves. And this is what we do. And it is based, to me, and to many people I know, upon the last notion I wanted to mention. I would not be able to hope for anything if not all those wonderful people I see every day who do all these things I've mentioned before, who treasure their fragility and fragility of the others, who overcome themselves, who get together. There is no other way, just doing it together to defend and to survive and to prevail and to win. And this treasuring of the others is about love at the end of the day. Because as we remember, love is about some ultimate affirmation of the existence of another being. When I say I love you, I mean I want you to be to an extent impossible in this world. I treasure you, I care about you, I owe you a lot, and I am intrinsically intertwined with you. and I treasure it so much. And all these things I can say just in one word, which is I love you. So I think we have been very harsh society at the moment, very militarized, full of grief and full of sorrow. We have a lot of love. And it feels like we are defending it. We are defending, treasuring other people because most people I know, we put people first, not the state, not territories, leaving aside resources or anything. We put people whom we treasure, whom we know and we don't know. The paradox of all this is that when we go from this individual and communal level to the more abstract or more political level, it all takes place in the context when we confront the system and the worldview which is totally opposite, which doesn't have people anywhere but in the place of disposable resources, where the state is everything and human being is nothing at all. I mean Russian world, Pax Russica, Ruski Mir, and they try to impose this worldview upon us, which is impossible, of course. And the longer it lasts, the more impossible it becomes. But the thing is that we see that in international politics, we also see this air which is opposite to what I've just described. Air of self-interest, air of fear of the other, especially if the other is different from you. Air of greed. It is time of not only murderers, but also vultures. We see what happened to the new policy of new American administration, who are interested in getting their cash back and resources of their former ally. And they show quite openly that they are not very much interested in anything else. So it is a paradox that we live through this time treasuring these things in the atmosphere which is hostile to all these values. And this is why, to conclude, when I was asked several times since my release, in interviews, in public discussions, something like, you were a human rights defender, and then you were in the situation of constant human rights violations. And I said, yes, actually, I took it sometimes as kind of field research trip, 2 years and 4 months of field research in human rights violations, which might be useful for my future work. And human rights institutions, they've done nothing for you. Are you disappointed? Do you still sort of believe in human rights? And I say, well, to me, it's not a matter of belief. I believe in things, but in different things. To me, it's a matter of fact. If I treasure other people, human rights as a concept can be only about the others and recognition of the rights and existence and abilities of the others. I cannot exercise my rights in full when the person next to me has his or her rights being violated constantly. It's not possible. And one should be in an atmosphere where human rights are constantly violated to understand to what extent they are important and they are essential. But also that they need to be protected and treasured and defended and nurtured. Otherwise, they should not be taken for granted. Otherwise, they might be under attack to an extent which might destroy us as human beings. So I'll conclude with this. Thank you very much.
An excellent introduction, and I think that you're brilliant in the morning. So now we are afraid, after you, it's really hard to start this comment. That is why I will pass the mic to Ostap Slivitski.
Thank you. Good decision. We found a way out. I'm really grateful to Maxim for this brilliant but also very profound statement.
and for this problematizing of hope and projecting future. I think this is the one of the things, one of the topics many of us think about in recent years. The usefulness and uselessness of hope as an idea. I'm recalling now the words by Polish writer and Auschwitz prisoner Tadeusz Borowski, who said that he wrote in one of his short stories about his experience in the concentration camp, that hope could be not only painful but dangerous, because the one who had hope, was getting more and more disappointed gradually, and this the stage of disappointment could get really really dangerous at some moment. And the one who did not start with hope, who started with the acceptance of what was happening, started with admitting of inevitability of what he or she had found herself or himself at the very start, would cope easier with the deteriorating situation, because the situation is deteriorating. Even if it's not getting worse objectively, we are getting more and more tired. So that's why our situation is necessarily deteriorating. And hope can really drive to disappointment only, and we lose our force, our internal powers to feeding hope without getting any positive feedback from our hope. So is there? I don't think there is a good answer, a good solution of this question. But sometimes I feel that I agree with Tadeusz Borowski. Sometimes it's better to live without hope, but with some kind of determination to resist. Hope and determination to resist are completely different things. One thing I started thinking about while listening to Maxim and the ways of resilience and projecting future. One of the important topics in Maxim's speech was this projecting of future, making some hypothesis of future. Yesterday I was talking to a colleague from Poland who visited Ukraine for the first time after the full-scale invasion began. And he was surprised that the everyday life in Ukraine looked exactly this way, that we sometimes enjoy our dinners, that we enjoy communication, that we keep publishing and reading books, that we keep producing and watching films, that we meet each other, that sometimes we joke and laugh. And he very honestly admitted that it was one of the most striking and surprising things for him, that he had imagined it completely differently. And I think that, for me it's absolutely evident that this is our way of resistance, that our enemies, that are our occupiers, aggressors, they expect us to behave differently, to lay down on the ground, to surrender, to start crying, mourning, and to go deeper into state of despair. That's what we are expecting of us. But so the even very humble celebration of life is a very important act of resilience. It's the one thing I was thinking about. Another thing is, I would call it generational question, because the second topic of our conversation with that about mentioned colleague was his hypothesis that our celebration of everyday life intends to provide the peaceful point of reference, that after the victory, after the end of the war, we will need this peaceful point of reference in order to maintain normal life, or to come back to peaceful normal life. We need to remember how normal life looked like. And I started thinking about the people who are 20 years younger than me, for example, my students, or teenage children of my friends who are now entering their adult life, and whose almost whole life passed within the war. So they do not remember anything else than war. Please remember that Russian-Ukrainian war lasts for 11 years already, and we have entered the third year of the full-scale invasion, but the 11th year of Russian-Ukrainian war. So present-day teenagers do not remember any other life than wartime life, and they do not have this peaceful point of reference. Unlike us, we remember the times before 2014. And I think that it's very important. It's horrible to imagine that things which are completely abnormal to us can seem more or less normal to our children, and their scale of values can be completely distorted due to this lack of peaceful memories. And probably this is one of the most important tasks of culture. I remember a very interesting discussion which happened after Maidan revolution in Ukraine. It was in the summer of 2014, and we gathered at the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Kyiv to discuss the goals and outcomes and consequences of the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity. And one of the participants expressed a very discussive idea that Maidan revolution was, among the other things, the defeat of culture. After being asked why did he think so, he explained that the Ukrainian culture, or the culture at all, did not manage to avoid violence. And we started discussing culture cannot avoid violence. Culture does not have this power to stop the one who comes with guns, who comes with arms, and who wants to kill you. We cannot stop the occupier with films, music, and poems. And we need this culture to maintain not only our values, but it's also very important to maintain our values, to remind ourselves what we fight for. That's why the wartime culture, unlike the culture of the peaceful times, seems rather tautological than metaphorical, because metaphor, uh, besides the fact that metaphor is probably our most important instrument to discover the world. We understand the world metaphorically, projecting one things onto another things. But in the times of war, metaphor can also be dangerous because it blurs meaning. It makes ideas, notions, and words ambivalent. While we need a very, very strict meanings, we need very clear understanding of the world. We need we need to be very well informed about what is happening. Otherwise, we can risk very much. But we need to remind a very basic, very essential things. We need to remind ourselves that black is black, white is white, white is white, that the enemy is the enemy, that a friend is the friend, that we need to, that we are fragile, that what Maxim said today, and we need to enjoy every minute of our life, of our personal lives and our common life with our closest ones. But also we need to exchange these values. That's why the wartime culture works as one organism. We are all the parts of the one chain, and we share the same ideas. Does it make the culture poorer, simpler? Well, probably. I think I admit it. The wartime culture is like it's like a military machine which must be very reliable, very functional. It must not be beautiful. Most likely it would be rather ugly. I can't easily imagine a beautiful war machine. Okay, it's not designed to be nice, to be beautiful. It must be reliable. It must be effective. The way the wartime culture must be. It's simplified, and it's very functional. And that's why also it's very hard to move in the same speed as the world culture moves. That's why Ukrainian culture is rather back. We cannot. But I have a good example. Very recently, the Polish novel by a very prominent Polish writer, Szczepan Twardoch, was released, and in my personal opinion, it's the best novel about Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine. The war after 2022, just because it is written from the outside. The writer and the narrator had more general view on what was happening. He could afford this optical distance while we are inside the situation. We cannot see the general view from the inside, remaining inside. That's why I think that best Ukrainian novels, I don't mean poems, poems and essays, reports can be or even should be written from the inside. But if we expect some more general artworks like I know, movies, novels, it will demand some time. That's why we need to wait for some. I'm sure that they will appear, but they will appear later. Now we need culture to maintain our social structures and to find these sources and these abilities to project future, because we need to think about future. We need to, even without being naive or utopian, admitting that every minute of our life can easily become the last minute, we still need to think about some kind of future. Well, thank you, and thank you for your very, very important statement. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having a possibility to listen to you. And why I am one of those who notifies the difference in your voice and how it works. But I still love all your voices. And each time this is something revealing. I'd like to make several points on what's happening and what I think. Some of these are provoked by Maxim, some of these are provoked by Ostap, or something that I think is important to think about in the frame of our context. I'd like to start with the term called afterlife, and this is a term that was produced by a famous Ukrainian contemporary poet and marine military combat medic called Yarina Chornohuz. And Yarina Chornohuz uses this term afterlife like після життя. It's from two words in one with the small minative letter. And the idea is, if we take, for example, during the COVID-19, everybody was talking about the burnout and how they burn to the ashes with their daily problems and how they're pissed off by their family members being in one small room, etc. And everybody's complaining about their burnout on job or daily work or working on the relationships with their partners. But in the frame of the full-scale invasion, it doesn't matter how burnt are you. Actually, you're burnt probably in the first day of the full-scale invasion, and then you're supposed to exist, and then you are supposed to be in a way productive even after you've been burned out to the ashes and then to the ashes of the ashes, and you are somehow supposed to be. And this is for sure on the primarily is about the those who are in the combat, those who are in the front line, those who are in the army, those who are in the active volunteering, those who are like, I don't know how Andrei is writing his new books and still managed to make 350 cars, for example, for the military. And this is the way, like, nobody asks him like what does he feel. He's just like doing this, and this is the state for understanding of. I think this is really important to try to find a term to explain how are we, because usually when we are in the international meetings and then we have this, oh, I'm so sorry that you're from Kiev, or you see tears in the eyes of compassion of people from other countries, and because you are Ukrainian and we want to be compassionate. And I think that the term afterlife pretty much explains how do we feel. Secondly, I think that throughout these years of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine is a kind of testing different institutions, and Ukraine is some kind of touchstone that cracked even Pope Francis, and in a way showing that the old organizations, they don't work. They showed that, for example, the war crime prosecution doesn't work. They showed that even with furious 100 days of Trump, Ukraine became a touchstone, as well as the democracy in the United States cracked in a way, and even the private institutions and organizations, they gave up with their, for example, equal rights or diversity. They just, like Disney, for example, they just gave up in during the first months. But Ukraine still stood and said, like, we will keep on going through this afterlife. And I think this is really important when the next invasions will appear, when the next conflicts will ignite throughout the world, to help those countries who will become next touchstones. And this is the thing about the intellectual voices, to hear that, the local voices, to support them and to give them platforms to share their experience and knowledge. I think third thing is really important, thinking about the how to go through the dark times, is a justice. And the Trump administration and what's happening, trying to force this crazy, stupid peace deal, they're forgetting about the justice. And the Russo-Ukrainian war is probably one of the brightest examples of clear understanding who is evil and who are good guys and who are bad guys. And there is a clear understanding that black and white, and as Ostap said, like, we have to repeat to everybody that black is black, white is white, as well as truth exists. And this is really important again, because I was really horrified when the moment somewhere in the beginning of February, Ukrainian activists supposed to write the explainers who actually started the war, and that we still, like 3 years into anniversary of the full-scale invasion, and I found myself that I'm writing the Twitter thread trying to explain, like, we just try to defend ourselves. And this is really crazy. And I think the future of other conflicts and invasions and wars totally depends on the justice on Ukrainian question. And this is so important. I'm not even telling the way of getting the compensations, reimbursement, like, who cares about that? Like, we are interested in just having Hague process or give these war criminals to Ukrainian prosecutors, and that's it, because it's supposed to be done in a civilized way to make another touchstone for that. Another dimension for the Ukrainian way of getting through the dark times is the connection with the classical culture. And I don't know how it works in your context, and probably you will mention that, but for us it became really clear and understanding that there is a huge demand on the market for the classical Ukrainian culture. We have so many classical books from 1920s, 1930s that are republished, and we have even this anecdote adventurous book from mid 20th century that several publishing houses published it as the first book and made the capitalized the way for making other editions from that. And like, you can find this Tigrolove like in 6-8 different covers from different publishing houses, and still there is a huge demand on the market. And I think this is one of the greatest examples of the Soviet heritage that we are supposed to deal with, because this executed generation from 1920s, 1930s, it never was the part of the culture. So now 100 years after that, those who are in 20s, 30s, 40s, like we are discovering the echoes and voices of that writers, and this is so important to understand that you might be reconnected to this lost generation, but on the other hand, you realize that there is a huge problem in the contemporary culture, that we have our own lost generation, and the last count for the people who wrote, the people who were connected to the publishing house, or those who tried to write, or those who had their debut collection of poems, it was 150. Those who've been killed, and those are civilians, those who've been killed in action, and this is just what connects to the poets. But then you have translators, you have publishers, you have editors, you have people who've been killed in the missile strike on the printing house in Kharkiv. Then you have sportsmen, you have cinematographers, you have taxi drivers, you have engineers, you have IT people, you have agricultural people, and we are losing people in any given sphere. And when we talk about the lost generation, primarily people from culture would talk about the people from culture, but the tragedy is that we are losing people in any given sphere and in any given generation, because the full-scale invasion is the genocide that touches from those who've been born after the beginning the full-scale invasion, and those who remember, for example, the World War II, because there was this story about the guy who survived the concentration camps and the Russian missile strike hit him in Kharkiv, and that's how it works in the circles of Russism and the concept of Ruski Mir. And the last point that I like to make about the culture during the full-scale invasion is that primarily when it started in February 2022, I thought that the function of Ukrainian culture is to document the war crimes, and we are supposed to be the fly on the wall, we are supposed to be chroniclers, we are supposed to work only with documenting the villains, we are supposed to work only with the worst side of human nature, so nobody would ever forget what the Russians committed to Ukraine and what they're still doing. But in the process, I started losing my friends killed in action, and I was supposed to write the farewell note for them for crematorium, for example, and this is the task for Ukrainian writer. And from that, trying to write a testimony about my friend that his daughter would read, and when she'll be more interested in what we've done through the full-scale invasion, I started thinking about how to make the live portrait of the fallen friend, and how we can, like when we look at the monuments from the World War II, we see the official figures, but we never think that those people lived, laughed, had parties, or also joked or something like that. So then the task of my understanding of culture became to write about the fallen ones. And then at a certain moment, for example, when the Russian missile killed Victoria Melina, as well, like we are supposed to write the lively testimonies. But then I realized that in the moment when we don't have future, and in a way we don't have even our past, because Russians either destroyed our houses, either they vandalized your apartment in a way that nothing belongs to you anymore. So in this concept, when you don't know what the future is, and probably they've stolen or they burnt your past, you should look closer to beloved ones and those who are still alive near you. And this is the last point for this, that through these months, when trying to talk about the full-scale invasion, trying to write text, I still try to focus war crimes, those who've been killed, and those brilliant ones who are around us. And I think this is a feeling that we share, that a sharp feeling of love to those who are near you, and a sharp feeling of rage for Russian invaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I would like to introduce you Alexander Pahiria. He joined us, a historian. We mentioned you before, but I was thinking about him because he joined us, and it is his first minutes with us. So he's sitting and thinking what they will do in the evening if they start mornings like this. uh, I would like to add a few things, maybe from a bit different point of view. When we started Dilemma in Georgia 2 years ago, it was really comfortable format because we were sitting near the mountains in a tiny village, near the vineyards, and we have no program conference. Now we have some kind of a draft of a program for our meeting, but at that moment it was totally free. So we met, and the aim was to share actually your dilemma. What disturbs you at this moment of life, in your private life, in your social life, in your country, and for you as a citizen, and so on. And I think that this approach is really fruitful because actually everything is changing so fast that something which we wrote, because Alexander mentioned that all of us Ukrainian writers wrote some piece for this anniversary, so-called anniversary of the war. Yeah? So it is like your duty because you have these dates and you can use them because you can propose some piece, some article to some foreign newspaper and so on. And you use these opportunities. And I think that what I have written in February is not so adequate to the current situation now, yeah, because all of the events are changing very, very fast. And if I can use one metaphor just to show you my personal view of the situation, it will be glass in cracks. I think that Ukrainian society and all of us Ukrainians, but first of all, I will speak of myself, it is like glass in cracks. Everything looks like, you know, like normal, but in fact it is deeply not normal. Everything is still, you know, is still working. Everything is still keeping like pretending to be normal, but in fact it is deeply not. And one of the biggest problems for us, it is difference of experiences. I think that these cracks are not only, okay, let's start from Uzhhorod. You are foreigners, you came here. We were, our plan, first plan was to have this dilemma meeting one day longer. But it is impossible to organize this event in Uzhhorod for one day longer because it will exceed our budget. Why? Because Uzhhorod is really expensive city. Uzhhorod is more expensive than Kyiv. So when you plan your budgeting and you want to organize the event in European Union, so probably it will be cheaper to organize this kind of event in Poland or in other countries than in Uzhhorod, because Uzhhorod is a peaceful heaven of Ukraine, yeah? And especially now in May, when all of the people are coming here just to, you know, just to celebrate life, as Maxim mentioned, or a few days ago, when we have this sakura blossom, and we had a lot of Ukrainian tourists in Uzhhorod. I met people from Odessa, and they told me, we use this opportunity to see, of course, these sakuras, but it was not our aim. First of all, we came just to sleep well, without air sirens and so on. And I think that, so for me, my first crack is that I am living in the most far away located city from the war, but most of the time I am describing the war to others. Most of the time when I write something, I write about the war. And do I have the right to speak about the war when I live in Uzhhorod? And it is some kind of a division that we have, geographical division, because of course people who live near front lines, they have different experience. And of course here in Uzhhorod we have different experience. But for example, experience of Kyiv and Lviv is different, and experience of Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv and Odessa, which are under attacks every day, is really different. And it is not only like about the geographical divisions, but for example, divisions within the army, within the military units, because someone is at the front line, someone is working from so-called stab or bureau, yeah, someone even from even soldiers who were fighting at this first front line. From time to time, they have some quarrels because if you say that I was fighting in Kherson, they will tell you, okay, but Kherson, it is not like real fighting. We had real fighting near Avdiivka, yeah? So we saw the real hell and so on. And our society is deeply divided with millions of different divisions, and even examples of some circles of friends, even examples of family you have, and this different experience is so harsh that after some time you actually don't want to cross it. And for me, it was a real problem, for example, with Maxim, because I understand that our experience is so different during these 3 years of the war. Yeah, so we explained the war and so on. But for example, for me, it is really hard to sit with you and ask you some questions, because first of all, they are banal. Second of all, I don't want to ask you questions and remind you some, you know, some bad moments in your life and so on. And it is psychological problem not only between us, but for example, when I met my friends who are in the army now, and usually we every 3 weeks we go to the front lines, and I met a lot of my friends. So our conversations are a bit false, because actually we don't speak about something, you know, something important. We are sincere, we are happy to see each other, to hug each other, but it is impossible to have normal conversation, because I will not ask him what I really is interested in, and they are asking me what is in Uzhhorod, how the life looks like, when the war will finish, because military guys at the front line, they strongly believe that we know more, because we have time and we read news and we know geopolitical tendencies and so on. So they asked me when the war will finish and we will return home. And I think that these divisions are actually among all of the people. And when I am walking here in Uzhhorod with my small daughters, you have this feeling of a guilty, because you are here, and the people who are walking and seeing you here as a male person who is in Uzhhorod, yeah, they don't tell you anything. Actually, even in their glance, they are not criticizing you, but you self-criticizing yourself because you are here. And why I use this metaphor of glass in cracks? Because you have a lot of cracks, a lot of tritium and askli, and you have these small islands made by cracks. And I think that the most powerful word which can describe our state now, both private and for the whole society, is loneliness. We are loneliness, we are captured in this jail of our own experience, which is totally different of many other experiences. And at the same moment, people are expecting from us, Ukrainians, to be, you know, to be general, to speak about Ukraine. When I am coming somewhere abroad, or when I have some Zoom meeting or something like this, or emails, people are asking me about Ukraine, about Ukrainian society, Ukrainian people, dozens of millions of people, and I have to express this general common experience. But there is no common experience. War took our privacy because you don't have time for your own life. You don't have time and you don't have some kind of, how to say it, it is hard for you to make some plans, to build some plans, and that is why you really live this life which has only one day long agenda. It is important to do what you do today, and you don't know what will be during the summer and so on and so on. And that is why this this type of life provokes some kind of mental or psychological state of feeling alone, that nobody understands you. And I think that it also can be, we also can say this about Ukrainian society, because we are really tired of complaining and, you know, and trying to explain our pain and trying to explain our losses and trying to explain our problems, and that we are on the edge of the big war, big world war or big conflict, and we are defending Europe and democracy and so on. So it is like empty words with no meanings, because when you when the full scale invasion started, of course it was meaningful and it was powerful. But now I think that we share this feeling that nobody really understands us, and we share this feeling that this loneliness is a bit fatalistic. So I think that is a bit pessimistic, and of course now after Trump came to power, situation a bit changed, and maybe it changed not so bad for Ukrainians, because actually after this shift, Europe started to understand what's going on, and I think that we have also some kind of a birth of this feeling of European loneliness, that we are alone here, we are captured on this land, and we are surrounded by ocean, we are surrounded by Russia from other side, and there is no way to escape, there is no way to exit, and we are not sure that someone will defend us, and it really changed the situation. But the main thing is that these millions of faces, millions, dozens of millions of experiences, which in fact create this panoramic picture of society, but each of them is captured in this small crack, and is in a way undescribable. So we made this entry word, and now we invite you to comment, ask questions, and we need to feel more free at this table. Yeah.
So just to let you know, I work in media over the last 3 years. We were the most Ukraine visiting Armenian crew. We made a documentary about the war. We're all the way from Donetsk, Lugansk, whatever you can imagine. We've been here, but this is nothing compared to what you guys are going through. We come and go, we do our job, and we sort of look at it from outside, but also never actually understand what is going on inside unless you come by yourself and you see what we're seeing now. I mean, the amount of fundamental strength and I mean clean philosophy. I mean, you deal with life and death, and that's the only reason which made us think to begin with. And what's happening here is boiling, and I don't want to go into the details of my own emotional state, but this is something that is fascinating. And thank you for being there, and thank you for fighting everybody's fight. Now, I don't come from West Europe, I don't come from Central Europe, I come from the Caucasus. And we don't know each other, basically, in so many different ways, and often stereotypes drive us. So to be here, to be able to see things from within, it's very, very important. Two things, questions actually. If you could actually say, because loneliness is one word, solitude is even further and has a lot more to cover. But if we have to get to a genuine conversation about how can others actually help, and to be very precise about it, because we are trying. It's one thing that you guys here have your own organized chaos. There is no other way you can run this kind of situation, I think, where it's so big, it's so many things happening, and you sharing about sort of this feeling of guilt is also fascinating. People who go through wars know that very well, and what you do is you try to make yourself useful however you can, and you do your job well, number one, and you try not to think too much about it because you'll go crazy. Otherwise, you can't survive. So we've seen this. You are seeing this, as you said, over 1,000 days now. But one thing that I think it's important to start realizing, and I know you're doing it already with the Caucasus, and it's very, very important because it's one thing to think about, okay, the US is out, now Europe is alone on its own thing. But it's also very important to understand that there is the rest of the world, and that rest of the world doesn't work just with geopolitics or, I don't know, political scientists dividing the world the way they think on Al Jazeera Live, right? I mean, it doesn't work like that. This connecting and connection is enormously important. And I think the one thing that maybe would be helpful from someone from outside is when you actually do what you're doing with us, with other people, and I'm seeing people transforming in the rooms because hearing the experiences and with the amount of, again, heft that you bring it is enormous. So intellectual connection and connecting with each other outside of the usual suspects is very important. So we're here to find ways of being helpful in a more effective way. And I don't need to talk about this. You know, at times of war, talk is cheap. You know, it's more important to actually act and do things. But it's also, as much as you mentioned, it's a day-to-day planning, obviously. You wake up, you don't know what's going to happen. You value life in a different way. But there's also some other planning that actually has to keep going. And that's where we would like to hear of sort of what is it that we can actually continuously do. Because we were discussing and people were talking about war fatigue, this and that. I mean, yeah, of course it's there. We're all tired. But this cannot fail because we will all fail. And we realize that very frankly. Like next panel, I will be talking with my Georgian colleagues and we're going to talk about how much we're afraid of how is this Ukraine thing is going to stop or end, because it's not going to end there. It's definitely moving forward, depending on how things stop here. It could be very selfish if you wish, I mean, but it is, we have to be frank here. I mean, we're all in this together. And I sort of wanted to exchange this. Again, very difficult to find the right words, but it's not, empathy is not the right, it doesn't do justice. We're all on this boat together in so many different things. At a huge sacrifice that you guys are physically having, but you know, one thing that I also say, we're also physically here. Ukraine has everyone, and everyone is in it, from both from within and from outside. So number one, if you could elaborate on, I mean, it's difficult to speak, but specific things that we could also keep doing while we're around. And number two, how can we actually stop being lonely and not talk about it, but engage more effectively intellectually? I don't know. it's things that are quite mixed up, and yesterday and today are heavy. But I actually do see some of the specific things that I'm planning to do when I get out of here, when I get out and start or continue doing my work. But very straightforward, very clean cut, like you're talking. You do this, that would be helpful if we could hear. And I don't expect that, it's impossible. Like, for example, I was talking and hearing you, and I was sharing with Veronica. We have war prisoners who came back from Azerbaijan, for example, recently. The numbers are much fewer than in your case, but these people are nowhere appearing in the public. They don't know how to come back. They don't talk. They don't go around and tell their story. There is not that aspect of healing that we can actually do. And all of the things that come after that with mental, psychological, and other issues. I mean, as tragic as this war is, you guys are learning on your own experience things that that would be very, very useful for many others and not in the neighborhood but in the world. So these are things that are fascinating, and I would love to see how we could do and then find grounds to actually sense that empathy, but also think about co-creating, like Armen was mentioning yesterday. Sorry if this was a little bit mixed up, but there's too many things going on in my head. Thank you.
Well, times of war, in times of war, you want to make yourself useful for others. And it is very important thing. I would like to highlight this because I think that when you become useful for others, this is the way war took your privacy, war took your life. And maybe Alexander or another will add it, but it is not only privacy, but also your freedom, especially when you are in the military service and you have no way to escape. And you cannot not only plan your life, but you also have to receive some kind of permit to come to Uzhhorod, even if it is weekend day. Yeah? You don't belong to yourself. And for them it is at a very extreme point. But for example, in my life, I also I am also feeling that I miss my life and miss my private things which are important for me. And I think that last 3 years I dedicated to very useful, to very important things, and I made a lot of things, but actually these years in a way are erased from my life. It is not my life, because all of the time I have, I do something to others. When I have free time, I'm volunteering. When besides it, I have to work and to earn some money. When I have some free time, I have family, so I have to dedicate time because I have this guilty that I'm not at home and I do not have a lot of time for my children and for my wife and so on and so on. And all of the time we are running and thinking, what else should I do? And because yesterday we have this official stage and official day, and today we are in this closed circle, and we could be more sincere. I would like to answer you a bit, maybe it will be some kind of rude answer, but it is sincere, that from time to time you are very angry to others. And from time to time you are very angry to even to your international partners and people who support you. And my last question yesterday at our debate about the neighbors of Ukraine and so on, about the ways how to explain Ukraine, how to promote Ukraine, cultural diplomacy, how to change mind of the societies, and so on and so on. My last question, we were out of time, but my last question was really simple. How do you think? What else should Ukraine do? What else should we do? We have to promote ourselves. We have to do some cultural events to, describe our history, problems, and so on. What else should we do for you? We are fighting. We try to survive. We really are out of any energy, both physical and psychological. What else should we do for you? Why do you think that Ukraine has this obligation to promote our own version of history, our own version of culture? Maybe it is homework of your societies. Maybe it is homework of your intellectual elites to, to discover real history of Ukraine and real roots of Ukrainian, Russian-Ukrainian war, because we are really exhausted, and it is really hard to, to play this terrible game at different tables and, and pretend to be effective and smile. We are really exhausted. So what else should we do? And I think, so if you ask me what you can do, first of all, you can criticize your prime minister for coming to Moscow, for example, yeah? Yeah. When Georgians ask me what else should we do, the open answer will be like, you have to open second front. So you have to take some parts of Russian military forces, and when we will spread these efforts, it will be easier for us to win. It is normal answer. When people from Serbia ask me, we really appreciate a lot of protests which last for a lot of years. Wonderful, but where is the results? When people from Belarus are coming and saying it, terrible situation, it is very bad and so on. We saw your demonstrations after the false elections and so on. We saw that everyone was very polite and staying at these branches without their shoes and so on. It was very polite, but where is the result? What else should Ukraine do for you?
I put it in a more diplomatic way. Not being in this exhausted mood as the organizers. So the diplomatic answer is that there are so many initiatives that in a practical way it's your like private initiative or your friends or your organizations. You can just pick up the direction that you like. If you like Ukrainian animals, you can support Ukrainian animals. If you like Ukrainian drones and you would like to see the results of how they work, you can help Ukrainian drones. If you are interested in helping the internally displaced persons, because there are so many and there are so many nice initiatives, you can support that. If you'd like to support the camp for the widows of the fallen soldiers, there are these camps. What I'm trying to say that there are so many initiatives for supporting directly the army or the action or the circumstances of the war. Secondly, that like if you need that, I can show you some stuff for that. Secondly, secondly, yeah. Secondly, yeah, but in your field, but I mean transferring this to the wider context when somebody will ask you how to make it. Secondly is for sure, it's in a practical way, it's more important to have it not the one-time initiative, to have it on the prolonged distance, like monthly payment or monthly investments throughout a certain period of time. And this is things that is more appreciated by initiatives and volunteers. And thirdly, I think what connects to directly to the cultural management, media, writers, etc. I think this is so important to, on one thing, not to feel this fatigue out of war, because it's never ends. And the moment when there are no news from Ukraine, it doesn't mean that there are no news from Ukraine, because there are so many. These they are just not in the headlines, and that's it. And as long as you will support, as long we will have this feeling that we are not alone in this, and this is so important to be reconnected in that. So that's a diplomatic way to put it.
Can I add something? It's about values, about how we really need to unite in this tautologic repeating to the world that black is black and white is white, that democracy is better than autocracy. It's a very, it can seem obvious to all of us gathered here, but it's getting less and less obvious around the globe now. Last year I was in the U.S. right before the presidential elections, and on the last day of my stay in the U.S., actually on the day when I was returning, I already knew the results of the presidential elections. So my communication with the audiences during the events was mostly about the forthcoming elections and about the perspective of Trump being president and so on and so on. And American audiences were asking what could they do for Ukraine, and my answer was very simple: please don't vote for Trump, and please convince your friends and acquaintances to do the same. And I did not see full understanding of my words. Even besides the fact that the audiences they weren't random at all. They came to the Ukrainian literary event, so they were completely aware what kind of event they attended. But still, the audience was divided. And after all, after one of the presentations, a guy stood up from in the audience, and he asked me directly, why did I think that Trump would be that bad? I said that Trump he presents the anti-democratic and anti-liberal values. I mean, not about liberalism, but about liberty. that he presented the world, the powers which conquer freedom as an idea. And what I saw in his eyes was some kind of skepticism towards me. He spoke from the position of the representative of the society which knows pretty well what democracy and freedom is, unlike Ukrainians who do not know what real democracy is, because we had never had enough democracy and freedom in our country. So they treated us as some children who just make their first steps, and so that naive that we really cannot evaluate understand what freedom is and what are the real consequences of freedom. And that what we really need is to keep calling evil evil, to keep calling good good, and to keep stressing that democracy, besides all darker side of it. Of course, I'm aware that democracy is not the best idea, but it's better than any other which can be possible, non-utopian ideas of establishing human coexistence, organizing human coexistence this world. Because we really, every day, unconsciously, we are facing lots of people who do not share our ideas, the ideas that seem obvious to us. We really face these people every day. We just don't know, we are not aware that these people whom we meet in the shops, in the public transport, in the streets every day, that they are that far away from what we believe in. In each of our countries, in each of the countries we come from. So I think it's a hard work. It's a draft work because it's sometimes it can seem a little bit lower than the level we would like to maintain within ourselves. That this can seem slightly too primitive to be done, but we are living in the times which really demand this kind of work. Speaking with truisms sometimes, because what seems truism to us is not really obvious and evident for most of the population of the globe, unfortunately. And it's getting worse and worse, unfortunately.
On this pessimistic note,
No,
I would
no,
like
no,
to
no,
announce a coffee break.
No. Oops. Yeah, I know where we are in terms of timekeeping. I'm sorry, but if all the commentators commented, I apologize for this. My editor would kill me now. So I was like, what main voice in this something? So I have to say something, if you don't mind, even if you do. Just trying to answer your question. Of course, in more general terms, continuing dragging on from yesterday's session, I would say continue to use those terms. Do whatever possible to let us stay lonely in our endurance. Do whatever possible so that we are able to withstand, because if we fall, which will not happen, I mean that, you will join us in these tragic circumstances. So let us go through this only us. Someone had to be there, in this situation, someone had to be there bordering this empire in making and going through this. It just happened to be us, like Ukrainians. Not Belarusians, whom I love dearly. I have a lot of friends, but their country is occupied without any single shot being fired. Yeah, well, if a certain army comes around non-invited and stays, well, is it, if not occupation. It could be someone else, but it happened to be Ukrainians. So let us be only us there, not other countries. Lonely, but not alone. Because if we are alone, that's a different story. Going to more practical level, the one Alexander mentioned. A few days ago, I had this friend of mine from Western Europe, whom I met at one of the public events in Switzerland. And she's non-Ukrainian, she's never been related to Ukraine. She was wearing military casual, which is the most popular, clothes style now in Ukraine, with русский военный корабль Единахуй chevron on the patch on her sleeve, etc. Apparently, she has a specific battalion which she befriended during her trip to Ukraine with medical supplies and something. And we are just in touch since then, and she asked me, is there anything I can do for you? And I was like, no, it's fine, I don't really need anything. And then I thought, okay, look closer. And she was very sincere and kind of insistent. And I was like, well, do you have people who are interested in Ukrainian symbols and colors among your friends? And she said, a lot. We are hanging Ukrainian flags out of our windows. We demonstrate Ukrainian colors everywhere. What's the matter? And I said, me and my friends and colleagues, we designed symbols of solidarity with Ukrainian prisoners of war. And now we are kind of just suggesting people to use it whenever they like. And she found that brilliant. Print them out, etc. I sent her a link. Anything else? I said, well, not much. I'm actually gathering now resources for artillery of my regiment my former regiment, but it's always my regiment. And a friend of mine who is now in artillery, my former brother-in-arms, he just went to the front line day before yesterday, and they need money for things, repairing cars, and so I'm gathering money basically. So if there is PayPal, you can contribute. She was brilliant. Anything else? Actually, when I was still in captivity, do you have friends musicians? And she said, yes, actually I do. Why? When I was in captivity, a friend of mine, British musician, apparently has written a song about me. And when I was told so, being in Barak, in a strict regime penal colony, wearing prison robe, and suddenly you are told that British musician has written a song about you, you're like, what's happened? Apparently he was very meticulous in details, so they finalized it exactly when I was released. But the third part of it is dedicated to all prisoners of war, Ukrainian ones, and it describes basically the full-scale invasion and the situation behind it. And they launched it with a campaign asking musicians from different countries to join the campaign to support Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians in detention, to write songs about them. So that if your friends, musicians, could be interested. And she said, brilliant. And apparently I realized I can go on and on and on and on and on, because we have a lot of these little things which actually constitute fabric of our everyday resistance. If someone elsewhere in any country where there is at least some model of the rule of law has something to do with law, just let's find out, does your country have universal jurisdiction? And if it does, let's cooperate on bringing to responsibility perpetrators of Russian war crimes, no matter if it's Germany or Argentina. It works everywhere, if it has. If you deal with text writing, what Stab basically mentioned before with a concrete example, sometimes the view from the outside is better, especially for audiences internationally. Let's write more about Ukraine. So basically the list is endless. And it is in every realm of life. And to conclude, I really adored your metaphor of the glass and cracks. But to end on a more positive note, when I was on rehabilitation still after my release, I realized that there is one thing which apparently became popular in parts of Ukrainian society, and then I saw this wonderfully published album, huge, extremely expensive, been translated into Ukrainian onto kintsugi. And kintsugi is really popular now in Ukraine, about cracks, which are put back together, and the cracks are painted gold. And every single glass covered with cracks is unique because it is different from any other one. It is, for obvious reasons, now popular in Ukraine. It's about post-traumatic growth. But I think it can be applied if we do enough, if we are dedicated enough to it. It can be applied not only to individuals, but also to communities and to our society, which is a very difficult task, but I think it's possible. Thank you.
So we are starting the second session. I just wanted to say that after the first discussion, what we are thinking about, and we can discuss it more later also, is to have this special space in our dilemma journal to exactly address this question and give the opportunities for the people to actually have these particular, very certain things that they can do. So we will definitely do it and think how to do it best together. Now we will start with how to make a difference Caucasus session, and our main voice is Nino Lomadze, and the commentators are Arsen Kharatian, Keti Kantaria, and Anna Japshipa. So please, Nino.
Thank you so much. I'm really proud to be part of the Dilemma Academy. That's my first time. I prefer to read some of the notes that I made for myself. I represent Indigo magazine. That's a community of journalists, writers, and scholars, thinkers from Georgia mainly. And as we are here, I'll start with my story from 2008. And it was the time when I had my eldest older son was 5 years old, and the younger was 5 months old, when a military base a few kilometers away from the place where we stayed was bombed at night. So that's my first memory of war. And I remember how I took them both in my arms and ran. All I can remember from, I was trying to just flee from the fire, and I kept seeing these Russian soldiers approaching in my imagination, and I kept running even faster. It took me 10 years to be able to return emotionally to this experience of 2008 war between Russia and Georgia. And I struggled to manage like two opposing emotions and feeling at once. And on the one hand, there was an overwhelming relief of survival, and on the other hand, a deep sense of guilt. While some of us were able to return to our homes and our daily routines, thousands died in the war, and tens of thousands lost everything once again. A decade later, I began visiting the families who had lost their loved ones and were displaced during the war, and heard the stories of how those families and friends had lived through war. And I began gathering the oral histories, collected over 200 stories. And what I know today is that how many stories you hear and how long you stay with people, listen to them with your open heart, this experience cannot be shared, really. Again, sharing the pain of people of Ukraine, to comfort it or to share the burden of responsibility of each citizen of this country is impossible from afar. And the world can only bow its head in respect before this country. As we all know, that Ukraine is holding back an immense destructive force with its own body. Russia has done this so many times before, and for many of the countries we represent here have witnessed the scenes. First in the war in Chechnya, and Russia-Georgian war, and later here in Ukraine. We cannot even imagine today how might have and what might have happened if the world have acted with greater conviction to the destruction of Chechnya. And countries like ours have long cried out against being like isolated and neglected, abandoned, and left to face this monster alone. And Russia still manages to make us live with these existential challenges. We still fight for survival and not for like development and progress. For Russia, democratic progress and strengthening open societies near its borders is a great threat. So Russia maintains control by carefully selecting the right points in Georgia. And Ivanishvili's power is a textbook example of a Russian special operation with no military presence there. And it follows the classic path. After difficult times, a savor emerges, granting people a brief respite, and the pressure increases when society manifests ambition to progress and develop. And for nowadays, we justify our weaknesses with the excuse of Russia's influence, and it surely gives us a reason to blame for all the suffering. But how Georgian society can benefit from this blame, that's the major question we often discuss. And we have no recent experience of coping with such crises. Until now, our only response has been desperate revolts against great imperial powers. In the past century, local uprisings, often crushed violently by imperial military forces. Later, the regime marched against the free thought, destroying the generations of thinkers in Georgia and more in Soviet regime countries. Only those in the regime's service could survive in those safe zones where there was no space for free thought or free expression. And understanding this context and this historical experience is very important for Georgian people today. And this is how we, because that's the way we got here where we are now. And it is only through allegories and smart metaphors that the truth, the historic truth, was preserved and until the times when it could be read in its real essence and forms. But many of us in Georgia share the feeling that somehow Georgian society is starting to awaken. Yet the regime lives on in the minds of generation, and the current government tries to destroy everything new and alive to maintain this old. And yesterday, Oksana Zabushko was discussing that Russian power always strikes at local weaknesses, which is so true in Georgia's case. And Russia uses ethnic tensions and poverty as tools, and constantly feeding polarization and creating enemies within societies. And for this purpose, it employs local political forces today. We have not yet created broad spaces for dialogue where this discussions, like free, open discussions, can begin, and spaces where we first are able to remember and then acknowledge our own history. For the past 30 years, we've only sunk deeper into silence and suppression, and now we speak from there. Georgians never speak of the civil war, about brutality committed, particularly against ethnic Ossetians. We forget the atrocities of the war in Abkhazia committed by Georgians, and likewise, Abkhazians do not speak about ethnic cleansing in Abkhazia on acts of violence. And these events displaced 300,000 people, making their refugees and exiles of all sides, from all sides. And this very choice today is what actually Russian propaganda holds on to. It has risen and grown on it. Today, history textbooks, even in Abkhazian, in Ossetian and Georgian schools, tell radically different and mutually exclusive historic facts. The authors of Georgian history, new textbooks now, today, that's the most recent facts, they are asked to refer to the 1920s Soviet annexation as the victory of Bolshevism, carried out by Georgian Bolsheviks and not Russian colonial forces, not to name them as Russian occupation, Soviet occupation. And we have torn down Soviet monuments, destroyed those symbols, but we haven't yet reached the essence and the content. So post-colonial thought remains quite weak and primitive at the moment. We gained independence, but have not yet begun building a free society. We haven't grasped the essence of the state or the Caucasian diversity. We haven't been able to preserve different identities, multiculturalism, or create spaces for critical thought. What is happening in the streets of Tbilisi today is merely an illustration of this historical experience. We don't properly know ourselves, nor we do know our neighbors, and we don't quite understand Europe, even though 80+% of the population wishes to integrate into European Union. We still haven't yet retold our story and haven't yet reinvented our national identity. Before it's scrutinized, it remains somehow based on the Soviet understanding and Soviet heritage, fueled by a singular statement, which is harsh nationalism. Georgian experience of protest and resistance is also very poor, and since the independence in Georgia, resistance movements and protests have been organized and led by political entities so far. This new development in our country is that for the first time, the anger and the rage and dissatisfaction and the concerns within society have manifested and articulated themselves as social demands. And this ongoing protest in Tbilisi are led by people, mostly young people, who have no experience and no memory of the atrocities, of the suppression. We were discussing it now, and it makes this process completely new and unique, and that's why we look at it really hopefully. Because it's really unprecedented throughout 35 years. While this protest is still led by inexperienced and young students, this society places a great hope in them. And it's like the youth has to bear this weight of responsibility for coping with and with meeting these main challenges. In the times when not only in Georgia but globally the states are governed by economic rationale, here the young people are trying to bring emotional, ethical, like value-based dimensions into political discourses, which is quite challenging. But we still do not know how to manage it, and it's all experimenting and testing all kinds of instruments and ways. How do we defeat a regime that has already taken on the form of an oligarchy, a regime without ideological foundation, no vision for the future? For over this 200 years when we were colonized by Russia, we were told that we could do nothing but fall as like martyrs in a war that is destined for defeat. And because in the end we would lose and be left alone, and we were told that we could not escape Russian Kalashnikovs or Russian bombs, and that we are a small nation and would be destroyed within few days. And this fear really grips people, and not just of battle and defense, but of even solidarity. And that is the major challenge that we face today, to make people again believe that we still can make it, and that ethics and values, justice can be brought into politics and even to geopolitics. As this protest continues, we're currently preserving the space where the process might begin and gain its strength and emerge, where something new can be born. And we were talking about being hopeful and keeping the hope, which is also that is the main major challenge for Georgians as well. That's why we look at the processes at Ukraine, in Serbia, in Hungary with much hope to find our place and our role in this global process, and to keep keep going and fighting. Yeah, because we regard the situation as this is a war that we live in. It has different forms. It's not yet military operation, but it's this warfare has so many faces, and we counter the propaganda. We counter the regime from within, and we have the Russian presence and Russian influence the strongest at the moment after our independence. And that's the moment that we can start discussion. For now, yeah. Thank you.
Where should I start? And I don't want to be long, but I want to give a little bit of context of where we are from my perspective. First, as Armenia today, in where it found itself, and maybe a little bit of the prehistory of why we are where we are. I strongly believe Armen made a couple of big comments about how we hate everyone and we think everybody hates us. That's one way of being lonely in your hatred, I guess, but I don't think we hate everyone that much anyhow. Armenia as a country and as a collective right now is going through a major identity crisis. And it is because of what happened in the war in Karabakh in 2020. And that goes back to the origin of this republic. If many others, including, first of all, Georgians in 1989, April 9 were announcing about independence, Armenia was not talking about secession or independence, it was talking about Karabakh. And there was a conscious decision in that movement in 1988, 1989, among the new political leadership and elite that, well, independence, if it's going to come anyways. Let's not talk about it loudly. Let's talk about Karabakh and try to solve the issue within the context of the Soviet constitution, blah, blah, blah. But that became a major identity marker for this republic. And it remained to be a key discussion narrative or a dominant political discussion, both domestically and for Armenian foreign relations, for foreign affairs for the next 25 years. Now we've lost Karabakh. It's all gone. We have 150,000 Armenians from Karabakh who were ethnically cleansed and ended up in Armenia now. And we don't know, okay, so what now? So what do we want to do, really? For years, we have been saying that, you know, we have such close ties with Russia because of Karabakh, because of security, because of this. In 2013, we did not sign, last second, did not sign the association agreement with the EU saying it's Karabakh because Moscow called us and threatened us that if something happens, there will be security issues. So we did the U-turn. I remember those days, it was a month before the Maidan here, and the Armenians were saying, look at what's going to happen in Ukraine. Because if in case of Russia-Ukrainian relationship, we had somebody like Yanukovych here. We had Serge, who was trying to do some things outside of the Russian vicinity, but wouldn't go far. He knew what he needs to do. So this whole huge new reality that we found ourselves in came as a huge shock, because for over 2 decades we lived with the myths that we're the strongest in the region, we got it covered, if anything happens we will show them their place, etc. And then all of a sudden we not only lose, but we have a catastrophic loss, and which brings out the dirty laundry. All the years of corruption, all the years of how the military wasn't really doing what it was supposed to do, how actually we have a very different reality on the ground, and how we should probably rethink a lot of the things that we have been living on. And the bigger question now is, what do we do? Where do we go? Do we really want to be part of the EU? Do we really want to be part of a bigger region? I mean, Armenian civil society, intellectuals, of course, they've been saying this for decades, but as a society, as a whole, as a collective whole, in this new reality. And then, another major factor that plays into the collective mindset is revaluing the relations with Russia. Never in my life have I seen the Armenian public so sober about Russia. Yes. And this doesn't mean anti-Russian sentiment as hating the nation. Not at all. There's a clear distinction between what Putin imperial policies are, not in the average discussion on a daily basis, but there is a huge debate about how we are betrayed. And that is something that you couldn't do by years of actually fact-based propaganda. And as much as we're thinking, okay, next year elections, we see Georgia, we see Moldova, we see Romania, Russian involvement in the electoral processes, what are they going to do? They're so freaking unpopular right now. And it's going to be very difficult to run on a platform, except for trying to do the same thing as in case of Georgian Dream in Georgia, which was working on the phobias. So Ukraine will happen to us if you don't vote for us. We need good relations with Russia so that we don't have a war like that. Similar thing is coming up to Armenia. They're going to say, you know what? The only security guarantor we can have in this neighborhood is Russia, so we have to have normalcy. I mean, Armen was mentioning yesterday, Armenia still has a military base. We are basically an occupied country. As much as on legal documents it's all clear, bilateral, this and that, but they are there. And they're there on the Turkish border, and they're there since the Cold War era. They never left. And back in the day, we didn't mind, but now we actually find ourselves in a very different reality. We find ourselves in a situation where okay, we lost Karabakh, but we can't normalize relations with Azerbaijan yet because they want more. They're not hiding it. Aliyev is using almost identical to Putin's language, denazification. You didn't exist, stuff like this. If you put it in, and they're brothers. We have to realize, as many state interests can be here or there. And at the beginning, in 2018, when the revolution in Armenia happened, and I was part of that revolution, I was also serving in the government, I was advising Pashinyan, and during our first visits to Moscow, I was telling him, even if we, pardon my French, kiss his ass, we're not going to click. Chemistry is not going to be there. We are coming from the streets, and he hates the streets. We have been protesting all our lives for bottom-up change, social change, revolution. He hates that. We are ultimately a problem. Moreover, make no mistake, the #1 spoiler is going to be Russia, because the way it happened is something that they're not going to allow to be successful. So there must be punishment. So we had that very clearly realized. I mean, it is now a textbook example that any former Soviet country that aspires democracy is getting punished, and that punishment is territorial. Georgia is the case, Moldova is the case, Ukraine I'm not even talking about, and now us. And it happened so that Georgia, which was the greatest hope of the region in sense of democracy, and has been, and for a lot of Armenians looking up, see how Georgians are changing things for years and years and years, now we appear to be sort of on the other side of the mirrors. Now Armenia, in this dark age of Trumpism and other things, you name it, is fragile but hanging in there in sense of democracy, in sense of trying to get rid of or gain more sovereignty. And then Georgia is flipping back, which is a huge issue. In the end of the day, the experience of Georgia, as hard as it has been, is very important if we're going to move any direction, anywhere to joining this neighborhood, which we, I think, culturally and mentally are ready for. Now, just going back to where are we now? I mean, again, just for the first time, we have a law now saying we want to be part of the European Union. That's a big deal for Armenia. I mean, again, a paradox. We have Russian military base on the ground. We just signed a strategic partnership with the US. 2 weeks ago did a military exercise with Iran and are getting some European money. So it's quite a paradoxical situation. And among other things, have a lot of Russian immigrants. I mean, a large number of anti-Putin crowds in the streets of Yerevan. And we're quite glad about it. I mean, people actually, it was Armenia, Serbia, and I think Cyprus are the 3 largest recipient countries. Georgia is very similar. So we are in a situation where we sort of ended up in this, okay, I mean, with tremendous losses and sort of revaluing or revisiting our own identity. We also have to choose camps, like rightly so. Why the hell are we going to my 9th parade? On the one hand, we're saying, well, we have the law going to Europe. We're friends. We send officials to Bucha for the first time. I mean, Armenians were very cautious and careful with this stuff. But at the same time, going to the parade. If something is wrong with that, I mean, things don't stick. At the very beginning, again, I was saying, like, when this change in Armenia happened, I was looking at this picture of this so-called Eurasian Economic Union. There is Putin, Nazarbayev, Lukashenko, who else? And then Pashinyan. I'm like, no, that's the Aliyev place, you know? I mean, this picture is wrong. But things don't fold necessarily like that. And what happens is when despotic regimes like Putin's, when despotic regimes like Aliyev's win in wars, then the notion of this consistent conservatism becoming more and more popular is gaining more ground to say, you know what, that's the problem. It's not about democracy or otherwise. It's effective governance. It's whoever is strong is going to win. That's as simple as that. And then you find yourself alone, even in the neighborhood. So for example, right now with Georgia, it's interesting. The government of Armenia is much closer at heart with Georgia's civil society, but it has to deal with the government. And it's because the predominant Georgian society is much more mature in sense of its, in many ways, and I can say this as an Armenian, because I see both. So it's much more mature, and I don't believe that this Belarusization of Georgia is possible. I call it Georgia's Belarus vacation. They will be back, they are back, and it's impossible to break this. I think it's impossible. It will be tough, it will get harder. As we mentioned, administration is changing and priorities changing. We are shrinking. Americans are shrinking independent media in our neighborhood while Russians are coming in with huge machines right before the elections, and then all of a sudden we're going to meet our Western friends and how did that happen? Like, look, that's how it happened. I'm coming from Brussels right now before this event, talking to European colleagues and talking about, oh, now Armenia is trying to do this, and like, nah, nobody is excited. Nobody really actually shows that there is some. We did this. We were thinking, okay, we have to do democratic change. Okay, they were saying Karabakh is gone, and then we will talk. Now it's all done. What's up? And they're like, yeah. Let's see what happens in Ukraine. In the end of the day, we end up in that circle, vicious circle, where they say, all interdependent, let's see what happens to Ukraine, and then we'll talk to you, and then our hand will get to you. So I don't have much optimistic to report, but I have one thing that I want to say. I think as much as the change of, I call it the age of digital oligarchy, right? I mean, we have digital oligarchs running the US right now. I lived in Washington. I'm going to DC this over summer. I've never seen Washington. It's like a city of ghosts. Nothing is functioning. Nothing is working because somebody came and decided that they're going to change the whole thing. And then we'll see how it starts functioning. But the reason I'm saying this is Georgia is a huge, huge challenge for so many years of the investment into democracy, into human rights, into building civil society, into building resilient. Now it's the fashionable word, right? They're using the same thing with Armenia, just not Ukraine. Your resilience, resilience, resilience. That's the name of the game now. And looking at what can happen, we have to rethink a lot of our strategies. We have to rethink about how we're moving forward. I think it's going to shrink the space for, I mean, in the end of the day, I think there will be some larger cooperation, but we should start thinking about how we expand our network and consistently work together, wherever status at that time we have as human beings or personally, but also there are areas and issues where the polarization of the so-called nominally powerful and rich, and the rest of the world is looking at some kind of marginal, and we were hearing at the keynote speech yesterday, that should bring us together with more effective tools. And I see that as something like Dilemma Academy, a moving academy, creating network, enlarging, but finding others alike and try to cooperate, not necessarily merge, not get bigger, that's not the point. Because what's big is what is being spoken in this room. Ideas that are going around and bringing new ones and moving people. I guess I stop here. Thank you.
I agree with Katia. I do not have so many words, but I will try to formulate some ideas that I've got during these 2 days, which were so important. And I will try to comment some texts that I heard during those 2 days. But generally, I have this feeling that I'm running out of the words, and due to this context all over the world, and Georgia and Ukraine and everywhere, somehow the words are losing their meaning somehow. So it's for me really difficult to formulate any ideas anymore, because sometimes, especially in my country now, we're fighting with this huge absurdity, then sometimes you don't have words to oppose all those kind of things. So it's quite a complicated situation. And not only words, but being a filmmaker and visual artist, I have this block in a way to produce new images, because we are so much overwhelmed with this, oversaturated with these imageries somehow, so it's really difficult to add something new. And when you do not have any power to add something new, you just stop or just observe and try to listen to some other people and rethink some concepts and ideas. So just I just can talk a little bit about the situation in Georgia nowadays and what are my feelings, personal feelings towards it, and challenges and frustrations. Somebody mentioned the word kintsugi, and I was feeling that I'm in a constant kintsugi situation, because my consciousness started on 9th of April in Georgia. I was just around 10 or 9 or something like that. And since then I have a feeling that I'm growing up with my country, with all the pains and victories and failures of my country somehow. So it's in a way, it's very much entangled to my biography somehow. So each thing that's happening in a country, somehow I feel on my body and my skin, because all these ethnic conflicts that I went through, because I'm coming from the mixed family, Georgian Abkhaz family. So, and I was watching the civil war from my window, literally somehow. So it's in a way, in my generation and older generation, we went really bodily experienced all this process somehow. So the words of my friends from Ukraine now, I really kind of feel maybe we are not in this kind of a constant military operation state nowadays in Georgia, but you just feel, because it feels like your war in a way as well, because it cannot really, you know, dismantle yourself from that context, because it feels so close and so ours as well somehow, and that's very difficult and complicated. And um, yeah, I was talking about the words, and sometimes I'm running out of the words because there's so many things to say. But I wanted to go back to the what I've heard from Oksana Zabushko yesterday, that about the culture. She was talking a lot about the culture, and culture being a guarantee for the security. And I found it so important, because nowadays in Georgia, all the main cultural institutions are closed. So we really cannot produce anything that would support our sovereignty somehow as an cultural actors. So all the funding, all the possibility even to think and reflect, it's so current, it's so now. So it's really difficult to make a commentary somehow, to be able to produce something, not because only of the financing, but because each day is resistance, each day you have to be present on another level somehow to support your country, and there is no way to think about, you know, how to do it on a cultural level, on a level to produce something new. Would it be a word or some other a device that we used to have? And it's very painful, and like each day is kind of just each routine day, mundane thing is an act of resistance for us already, and it's really very complicated in that sense. So the words mentioned here, the fragility, is so important to us as well, because every day feels so fragile, because you don't know how to continue with all the struggles and everything. But everything, on the other hand, seems so black and white. It's really easy to have a position in nowadays world, and it's not sophisticated anymore. It's so black and white somehow for me to have a position and to have a place where you stand. And another word that comes to my mind is simplicity. Every phrase that I hear here is so simple and so direct and so important. And this simplicity is something that we have to get back to and to understand, to talk really simple thing directly. And I think it's a really, very important thing. Another thing that I think a lot and challenges me is a coexistence with all this kind of crazy absurdity, and on the other hand, coexistence of our governments with the constant struggle of the people. You just do not exist anymore. You just try to resist. You just try to go out to the streets and do something against all these atrocities and absurdities, but you just are not heard anymore somehow. So somehow these governments, and I really observe in different countries, like in Serbia, for example, and Georgia, so we have this protest, like constant, never-ending protest, but somehow our governments, and we as well, we coexist in this kind of a crazy environment, and you don't really find the ways what you can add to that, how you can break this circle, and it really makes you powerless somehow. But on the other hand, I would also stress this idea of solidarity that I encountered in my society where I live. I don't know whether it was hidden before or it ever existed, but now I really feel this power of empathy and solidarity, like in a very simple gestures, like people collecting money for the huge fines that the demonstrators get every day. The fines just to block the streets increased, and it's around 2,000 euros. And in the social context of Georgia, it's a huge amount of money, and people would get 5, 10 fine each 2,000 euros. And people with a very low income, very low salary, they have this big, huge funds and collecting some kind of a money in a way to help save these people from evictions or from different kind of troubles that are coming from not paying this amount of money somehow. And not only for that, but somehow when all the system is collapsing and you feel this collapse really very actively on our skin, and then the people take power somehow and they just gather themselves within themselves, and they just gather the money not only for the fines but for different illness that people have or different catastrophes that happen. For example, there was big snow, the bad weather previously, and snowfall so huge that people's houses collapse and people would die. And it's only volunteering, like helping. No, government is not doing anything, and just people have the responsibility to do everything. And not only that, but even collecting the money for Ukrainian drones as well, because I know lots of solidarity funds, and people really almost half of my friends, all their salaries go to that kind of solidarity funds, whether it will be local or international. So this is the only thing that makes me hopeful somehow at some point. Maybe it doesn't work so actively as a form of resistance, but maybe at some point it could create some new forms of resistance somehow, and some more power to change something, because at this point it becomes like a cry in the desert somehow, all these kind of things. Yeah, that's what I wanted to comment. So maybe we can open discussion, because it's really difficult to formulate all these ideas into some sentences at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us this view to the Caucasian situation. More and more we feel how interconnected we are with all our issues. One thing I want to pick up from even what was said by Armen yesterday, and my question would be about the memory, the culture of memory, or the way we remember. And it comes even not from our context, but it comes to me more and more from today's Israel. Because what we faced after 1989 in our countries, having Jewish community before the war and being involved in Holocaust with our indifference or even committing crimes towards our neighbors. So we were experiencing the way how Israel citizens do the memory policy. And more we were convinced that it is a wrong way you deal with memory, because it was like a huge factory of victimization and having obsession on your own wounds and suffering, which made you more and more blind toward the others in context of Palestinian people, for example. So we knew, and many of our friends in Israel, they knew it. Yes, they invited us to develop counter-educational programs. That these young people from Israel will not go only to Auschwitz, but also to Borderland Foundation, to other places, and to talk about other issues and other sufferings of Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and so on. But there was no way, because of the state policy. You know, they were forbidden to do all these kind of things. So it was this huge factory of being self-obsession on your victimhood. And I see the link between what is going now today with the way of they remember, how they remember. And what Armen said, and what I know from Armenian friends, this experience of genocide for you is also the lesson which has, or it's a factor which has an impact of your today's life and the situation you are here. My question would be, what is your lesson? Because even thinking, we are talking about, even thinking about the future in Ukraine, I think it will be an important message also for our Ukrainian friends, because they will have also this huge victimhood, yes, after the war. And we are talking about people like Ukrainians in Russian war, Jews in during the Holocaust, Armenian during the genocide. At that time, there were innocent people. Some in that historical context. So it was this ground for victimhood. You know that we were on the right side. We were innocent victims, which is of course legitimate and true. But the way after, we proceed with our memories, commemorization, and the politics of memory, is it could work against us, yes, or it could become a huge problem in the future. So, how you would answer to that question? What is your lesson with this culture of memory?
Well, you're bringing up a fundamentally deep issue of memory politics in general, and we've had different phases of that, as everyone else in this room. If we have to comment particularly on the Armenian genocide and how the memory politics has been built around it, it's very different in different places. Up until Stalin's death in the Soviet Union, it was forbidden to talk about the Armenian genocide. In fact, people who were talking about the Armenian genocide were being sent to Siberia because of the treaties that Turkey and Soviets had. The Kars and Moscow Treaty have a particular point where it says you should not encourage anti-Turkish notions on the borders, and same, you should not encourage anti-Soviet notions. So at that time when memory politics was by large in the hands of the centralized Soviets, the history textbooks were telling about who the enemy is, and the enemy was not the Turk, the enemy was the Persian. We started having some stories about how Iranians were deporting Armenians 400 years ago, etc., etc. Now things and situation changed after Turkish succession to NATO, and the genocide memory came around. And by 1965, the Soviets allowed us to have a huge memorial commemorating the genocide, right? So that became and started playing huge role in the new identity of Armenians. And so one could say this was a good ground for Armenian nationalism at this time. Moreover, because of the large diaspora, including everywhere in the Balkans, West Europe, Middle East, etc., different Armenian communities, depending on how they would identify themselves, started working with the Soviet Union because Soviet Union was anti-Turkish. And this became a very good ground for the Soviets to use the Armenians to actually regulate things. But setting that aside, getting back to the genocide memory, if you look at, again, 1988, 1989, there is a very, very good publication called Iconography of the New Armenian Identity. The 88-89 movement, although it was about Karabakh, it was between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, but there was a deliberate choice of the elite at the time to make Azerbaijanis Turks so that we can consolidate, Armenians can consolidate more and this would be a vengeance for the genocide. So that was a collective thinking. These are things that within Armenia we don't talk now. I mean, we do, but it's not a large discussion among the academics, unfortunately.
Because, yeah, many people of Turkish, Azerbaijani identity were expelled, yes?
No, that of course, but I'm talking about, of course, yeah, I mean, we had large number of refugees from Azerbaijan, of Armenians, and they had, so basically swap. Thank God, not a lot of violence during this. There were cases, but in most cases it was, yes, but you're right, there were no Azerbaijanis or anybody left. But even inside the Armenian humanities, academic circles and elites, issues of this type are not popular to discuss because we have to stand by the main narrative. So what I was trying to explain is if the first war in Karabakh was sort of Armenia's vengeance for the genocide. And Azerbaijanis became basically the villains of, and a lot of Azerbaijanis are telling me, you know what, I mean, we're not Turkish, no, and we had nothing to do with your genocide, sorry, why are you doing this? But talking about how memory politics plays in at different times, depending on who is the narrative writer or who is sort of in charge of building the official narrative. Now, we heard about the differences in the textbooks, obviously, right? I mean, you open any of the textbooks in our small region, I'm not even talking about Abkhaz or Georgian, I'm talking about Armenian, Azerbaijani, Georgians of the same period of time. You will not find anything that actually, there could be completely different narratives. And this is creating official memory of a collective, right? So that's like the regular history. So in the context of this identity crisis that I was explaining in case of Armenia, there are very interesting challenges that the current leadership is throwing, provoking a lot of the existing strong stereotypes based on which we have been functioning as a collective whole, playing with symbols, suggesting a very different narrative, which sparks a lot of anger within the society. I'm not sure this is the most effective method to move forward. I wish we had bigger and more advised discussion on particular matters. But I think as dark as the times are, Armenia may have a chance for, or the Armenians in general, with the genocide memory, etc., revaluing some of the existing collective thought. As for what we have learned one thing, and that is issues of this nature, especially when you're dealing with a huge player like Turkey, become a weapon in the hands of the third parties. At some point, the Armenian genocide recognition discussion was outside of Armenia, Turkey completely. The French wanted to get something from the Turks, they would bring it up. The Israelis wanted to, Americans, etc., so on and so forth. Now, having said that, we're also trying to engage bilaterally, saying, you know what, things happened, but let's talk. And we're not getting much sympathy to that and much interest to that. And that may have to do also with some other issues. First of all, mistakes that we may have made back in the day, but at the same time, the new realities that we are functioning in.
So I see there are two opposing processes. First, we have experienced the social forgetting, and we have socially, culturally forgotten the important facts from the history, and that was the memory politics from Soviet times, and I don't see it really reshaped and changed a lot after the Soviet times till Saakashvili's governance. So we used to have forgotten even our Soviet past, And we, even me myself, was learning from the school books, history books of Soviet times, where there was no stories about repressions and Soviet annexation told at all. I like this scholar, Vamik Volgan, has a very good theory about the chosen trauma, where the nations and communities choose traumatic events and they shape their identity, national identity upon it. Which was very well used by Soviet propagandists. And this whole narrative of Georgian identity was built upon the martyrs and people who sacrificed their lives, and all the stories were the stories of defeat. There was no victory. And all the martyrs who fought for freedom or justice, they were defeated by bigger forces. That's why I'm really hopeful to see this young generation of students who have no memory at all, and who have not, I mean, they do not, on the other hand, they know, I mean, have no idea about the historic experience, which is quite problematic. But on the other hand, they are not raised with this, and they have not chosen traumas, and their identities are not built on those martyrs and people who sacrificed their lives and were defeated, which is very very hopeful thing for me. And that's why they have more courage, and they are just completely new phenomena that we have not yet even know properly. And that's why we observe, and we just observe and try to just support them and not lead them, not to lead them on the wrong path that we've taken many times.
Well, in fact, it's a good time and good moment to mention Giedroyc, and as a person who is not very not popular, but he's not known in Caucasus at all. This was well, in one word, he was just an editor, pan redactor. There was edition of Polish emigre circles. It was named, its name was Culture, Kultura, and the persons, very outstanding Polish intellectuals, we may say that they created the context where the independence of Ukraine, Lietuva, and Belarus became possible. Why I was interested in him? Yeah, I'll tell you, mea culpa. I'm sitting right to this Abkhaz person. I had the ears of... No, I am not. I am not. By the way, my father worked there. He wasn't. I mean, he was not from there. He was part of that Beria-Stalin politics against Abkhaz to send the Georgian specialists, because he was much older than he was, under 50 when I was born, so he was that old. And he lived there for, he was a physician, he was sent there, and he lived till the end of his life. So I kind of know some history from inside, and afterwards this interest was added some facts and some other developments. And I was thinking, just as an experimental way of thinking, what if Abkhazia will be given independence? What will happen, and what are the conditions could be for this, and what are conditions under which all the people who are affected, were affected, will be equally content or equally angry, but at least yesterday we told about the compromise with Victor as what is compromise, when none of the sides receive what fully what it wants, but partly its claims are satisfied. Yeah. Now it is not time to talk about that. We may talk about it some other time, since we are in Ukraine, and the whole year I'm waiting for this moment just to come and somehow show that I don't know, support. I don't know. I really sometimes think that the only possible support for Ukraine, the real support, is perhaps to fight physically, perhaps. And if I was a man, perhaps I would be here, and it is good that there is this Georgian legion, that somehow this what makes us at least a bit, not so ashamed. But I don't know if it is enough. I just wanted to tell you all that there is no day that we don't think about Ukraine, and that we are in. It is just, believe me, it is just, maybe it is not, it is a bit shameful to say that this is our war too, because we don't fight fully, and we don't lose lives, but somehow it is really, we just have these thoughts in our everyday life. And in fact, we are emotionally, we are with you every day and every hour. I just want you to know that. As to Giedroyć, perhaps Krzysztof is the right person to talk about him.
Two sentences why Katie recall Abkhazia in that context, because the question is, of course, nothing is comparable, between us in Polish, Lithuanian, Ukrainian borderland, Belarus with Yugoslavia, because when you would adopt Giedroyć philosophy in former Yugoslavia, you would say at the very beginning of democratization of the process that Kosovo should gain independence, and then the people like Milosevic don't have this power of nationalism, to defend our Kosovo and so on and so on. And the question now for Georgians, not loudly expressed, but still somewhere, is what if Abkhazia gained independence? Maybe we should invest our goodwill and let them not only to agree with that, but even help, and that will be the way how our refugees can come back, and that we can establish new kind of relationships and so on. Politically, still it is very dangerous to say like that, but you have more and more people questioning it, at least. So it would be on the Giedroyć line, yes? Because imagine just after the war, he has established establishing this culture magazine, and it instead of victimizing our suffering Poles and after the war, he is building this school of self-critical thinking, the mistakes we did with Ukraine, with Belarus, with Lithuania, and we should invest our will and power, you know, to rebuild good relationships and help them to be independent, and this will be anti-Soviet, really opposition, you know, in that way. So instead of other emigre circles full of this, you know, we were betrayed, we are victims, you know, we lamenting on ourselves and so on. Suddenly, Giedroyć built this platform of saying, look, but it's like Victoria said yesterday, it's not kindergarten anymore. Yes, you are responsible for yourself. Yes, do something from your side and so on. So this is, I think, also very up to our discussion. You know, this context, how we could react, and it was not accidental that he called this magazine Kultura, yes, culture. And really, for 1989, when communist collapse, we had, thanks to Giedroyć, a ready foreign policy and ready strategy, you know, for our neighbors, yes, and all his disciples went to the government, in fact, and built, you know, new independent Poland. So he educated with this magazine, you know, the whole generation who took power in New Poland. Yeah, so you may say there was a very small circle, just few people, somewhere far away in Paris, you know, but the impact was like no other, yes, for that.